Hello everyone, and welcome to another devlog for Space Corp. I'm going to conduct this episode a little differently, and before jumping into development progress for this week, I think it's important to talk about my basic vision for this game, as I've kind of skipped over it in past videos. I want Space Corp to be a single-player RPG game where you and several initial crew members embark on a journey to a desolate planet to try to establish a foothold for your newly formed corporation. You start out with a modest piece of land and a starting headquarters building that is granted to you by an organization trying to promote human colonization of distant planets. You arrive on a rocket with a small amount of food and water, and no fuel for a return flight. The early stage of the game is gonna largely be establishing a stable food and water supply for your crew to survive, and working with the crew to advance the state of the base. If you're running into trouble with food supply, you can radio nearby traders to land at your base and sell you some supplies. Another aspect of the game will be exploring the planet that you've landed on and conducting scientific research to advance your knowledge of the local environment. While exploring the planet, you'll come across some alien life forms. Some are friendly and some aggressive towards you. Later on in the game, you can establish an ability to produce some rocket fuel and leave the planet to mine asteroids or visit larger human populations to trade your resources. The first thing I worked on this week was an initial pass at creating a headquarters building, which will be your crew's starting base. So I got to work in Sprite, and this is what I came up with. I don't have a ton of experience with pixel art, but I'm pretty happy with how this is looking for now. On the right is a little landing pad for a couple of rockets to park. One rocket will be your crew's, and the second will be for traders and visitors to come down and interact with your colony. On the left, I have a little greenhouse dome for growing crops. In the start of the game, the planet won't be able to support earth plants, so crops will need to be grown here initially. The base is equipped with a couple solar panels for generating electricity at the start of the game. And just for some flavor, I added a neon sign to the front of the building, which actually have emitting light in the game. This is entirely unnecessary and would be a total waste of energy, but I kind of want my game to be a little lighter on the realism side. I think it's just a fun little way to show that. With the exterior of the base looking pretty good, I went and created a tile set for the interior. And this is what I came up with. It's going to be bigger on the inside with several different rooms, but this is what I have so far just to show the tile set. And this is roughly what it's going to look like. If you remember from last week, I created some falling meteorites, and I wanted to make these mineable for the player. So I created some loot objects that the player can get from these fallen meteorites. I also created different levels of rarity for the resources that are being mined. I kind of wanted this to be kind of like opening a pack of cards where there's lots of common materials and a little bit of uncommon, and occasionally you get rare resources from it. And there's also like a 1% chance to hit like a jackpot meteorite that only has rare drops. And as I add more items to be mined from these meteorites, I can just simply add them to these lists in the inspector to indicate their rarity. Another thing that I worked on this week was upgrading the system that I had in place for player interactions with different objects in the world. I'm now giving the player a little indicator when they're in range of something they can interact with. There's also different indicators for the different types of interactions, such as the ability to open a door or start some dialogue with an NPC. I created these interactions by having interactor game objects that I attach to objects in the game and also the main character. And these interactor objects just have a 2D box collider with the is trigger flag set. and an interaction script. When the player's interactor object overlaps with another interactor from an object in the scene, the interaction indicator is displayed. And if the player presses E, the interaction is executed. If the player is in range of more than one interactor at a time, the closest one is calculated based on distance. And I really like how this turned out and think it gives the player a really good idea of what they can interact with in an area. The last thing I worked on this week was dialogue with NPCs. I wanted to give my dialogue system a lot of flexibility to enable things like group conversations with multiple NPCs, and also the ability to ask questions to the player and do different things based on the player's response. What I came up with was this concept of conversations being built from different dialogue nodes. So like a talking node is just where an NPC is saying something to the player. A question node is where the NPC is asking a question to the player. And then response nodes are potential answers that the player can choose for a given question. And response nodes can execute some custom code, or it can link to other parts of the conversation tree to further the dialogue. These dialogue nodes can be chained together to create like a short conversation, or you could have like a really long one with multiple questions and responses. I also programmed these conversation trees to be serializable, meaning that I can write up any conversation in a JSON format and import them into my game. This will make it a lot easier to create a bunch of dialogue in the game, as I just have to create new JSON files for different conversations. So I threw together a little example conversation here. If I walk up to this NPC, I get the little dialogue indicator, and then if I start that, he's got just like a talking node to begin with, where he's saying his greeting to me. And then this question node comes up where he's asking about my favorite type of food. And if I pick a certain response, then he responds to that specific answer. And then just as a little thing here, I wanted to execute some custom code if this option is selected. So if I pick this, the player takes 5 damage, just to show there can be custom things that come off of a response node. In the future, I might be using that custom code to maybe give the player an item or accept a quest from the NPC. This is what that conversation looks like that we just ran through, and this is in its JSON format. As you can see, all of these nodes are being said by the character Steve, but we could easily alternate the conversation between different NPCs. I want conversations with multiple crew members to be something that's doable, and with this system, it's going to be easy going forward to create a bunch of NPC dialogue. Super happy with how this dialogue system turned out. That's about as far as I got this week. If you want to follow along with the progress of this series, feel free to subscribe. And if you have any ideas for the game or any questions about the programming, feel free to leave something down in the comments and I'll be sure to respond. Have a good day and see you next week.